In this second tutorial for character performance, what we're going to be doing is putting the in-betweens into the animation where we have keyframes. If you look on the web, if you do some study in books and things like that, there's many different ways of doing this. What I've come up with is basically just my own personal way of working, and a lot of it is due to just trial and error and the way that I like to work. If you read some things online, you'll read some articles about pose to pose, and that's what we've done so far for our keyframes. But then there's also straight ahead animation, and straight ahead animation is more where you work from one point or point A to point B, and you just go straight through without putting another keyframe in or a pose. So far we've just been working pose to pose, and that lends itself very well to very good solid animation where actions are placed where they need to be, where poses are very expressive where they need to be, and where it's very predictable as an animator as to where your animation is going. Straight ahead is more of a fluid thing where you're not quite sure where you're headed, but what we're going to do is kind of a hybrid of the two, where not only do we do keyframe animation in pose to pose, but we also do it in straight ahead animation. The way I like to work is I like to put in my keys, but I also like to put in my in-betweens as if I'm doing keyframes. Right here you'll see how I have all the, for Will here, I have all the keyframes in here for the animation, and what I'll do is I'll just go in between each one of these keyframes, and I will, excuse me, I'll go in between each one of these keyframes, and I will put down an in-between that describes the motion even better than the keyframes do. Now, one thing about computer animation is that I've come to really utilize is the fact that the computer does a lot of work for you. It doesn't do a great job of doing it for you, but it gets you close to where you want to be. Sometimes you'll read about people who say, you know, start with stepped animation, stepped keys. For example, if I, you know, check one of these right here, if I check one of those bones, you'll notice if I go into my graph mode, they're all stepped. It's stepped animation. Some people will say continue with stepped animation even when doing in-betweens. That's fine if you want to do that. One thing I've noticed though is I like to see my arcs. When I put an in-between, and I like to see an arc, and it's hard to see it when you don't have an arc, when it's just snapping from frame to frame. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to change everything to spline. Some places you'll also read on the internet, you know, work in stepped animation all the way till you have all your keys in and all your in-betweens in, and then switch it to linear and see what's going on, and then switch it to spline. I like working in spline because what I can do is I can get it close to where I want right off the bat, and being able to see that. I use the splines and I use the curves to visually see where my objects are going. Like a hand, if I'm getting a good arc, you'll see that in the graph editor. You can't really see that when you're working in a linear manner or in a stepped manner, and so it's a little easier for me to work in a spline mode when I'm doing my in-betweens. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the bones, or the bones folder, in the skeletal animation. And before I do that, I'm going to switch back here just so it's easier. I'm going to zoom in like this, go back to graph mode, and there's all my keyframes. I'm going to click and drag, and you have to hold it down, you can't let go. And when they're all highlighted, then you can let go. And it'll take just a second, and then this yellow bracket or yellow box will show up around them. I'm going to right click on them, interpolation method, spline. Now it'll take a second to change these all to spline, but now you can see kind of where we're going, or where he's moving with this stuff. I'm going to change it back to a key or a dope sheet mode, and you can see how he's moving now. Now, the computer didn't do a very good job of doing the splines. There's a lot of interpenetration. There's a lot of there's a lot of places where the animation is not very good. It's because the splines are not set correctly, and like right here you can see how he's just floating from one pose to the other. We'll fix that with in-betweens. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into time-lapse mode so you can watch me put in all these in-betweens. And while I'm doing so, I'll be drawing on the screen a little bit, and when I'm doing that, I'm kind of showing you how I want to do my arcs and where things are originally. Like sometimes you'll get a hand that starts right here and goes out to here and then goes up to here. Well, I don't want this triangle. I want a nice arc that does this kind of thing. And so I'll be drawing on the screen, and you can kind of see where I'm trying to go with that. But I'm going to do it in time lapse so that you can see it in a quick manner, and it won't take 3 or 4 hours for you to watch it. So I'll be explaining some things as I go, but I will do that in annotations afterwards, so you can just watch it as a time lapse video.